Welcome, Twitch chat and YouTube, to my Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. That is a mouthful. Set review in regards to Vintage Magic the Gathering. It feels like just the other day that we reviewed Modern Horizons 2, but that is the speed at which sets are being released these days. So we're going to go through this set. I've heard that the set is a lower powered set. I've briefly seen a lot of the cards that have come through, and I didn't think there were a lot of vintage playable cards, but we'll see if we can find any as we go through the cards today. Not going to happen with these Planeswalkers. They cost too much and they don't do enough. I don't see these Planeswalkers doing anything inside of Vintage. Same for these large sets of dragons. They're just not aggressively costed enough for Vintage. This one gets played out of the graveyard, but still probably not strong enough for Vintage. Still not seeing anything here. This is a cool one. This is white for an angel maker if you're gaining life. But the cool part about this is white exile to give an angel enlightened. You can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. It's not probably ever going to be strong enough, but at least it has like some applicability against things like Doomsday. But a cool card nonetheless. This is a card that people are really excited for. Blue, Demi-Lich. Blue, Demi-Lich. Costs less for each instant and sorcery you've cast this turn. A 4/3 that attacks, and you can copy spells from your graveyard, but you do have to pay for the cards you cast. And you can cast this from the graveyard for exiling 4 instants and sorceries, in addition to paying the cost of however many blue it costs. I don't think this is going to see Vintage play, and I actually don't think it's as good as people believe it is. I believe that this card is deceptively, it looks really strong, but I don't think it's actually as good as people think. It is kind of hard to chain cantrips and spells in Vintage. It's not like hard, but it's not as trivial as people think it is. And another thing that eats at the sorceries and instants in the yard, it means it combats with your playable slots in terms of Delve and Dreadhorde and those kind of things. So I am of the opinion that I don't think this card is going to be good enough for Vintage, but I could easily be wrong. It is a very powerful mythic that's very splashy and does it does do an extremely powerful thing, but I'm just not seeing it right now. I don't think so, but could be wrong. What this thing is, when it enters the battlefield, if I haven't completed a certain tomb, you return it to the hand and you venture. The only thing I've seen with this card is that you can play it with a Lurin and just do not this tomb over and over again. You could do one of the other dungeons. So it should kill your opponent, I believe, because I think one of the dungeons has a drain and a treasure, so it should be infinite drain, infinite treasure, and maybe that's cool. A Lurin is a sweet one, and I have played a Lurin in Vintage before. The biggest problem with Lurin is that you have to put a bunch of creatures in your deck, 1, and 2, it gets hit by Force of Vigor, which is a really bad tempo loss. So while you can totally play it in a Vintage Lurin deck, I haven't seen a very strong Vintage Lurin deck in a very long time, so I don't expect it to see very much play. This card is just underpowered for Vintage, very likely. A 3/1 flyer, can't block. I don't see it happening. This is a big dumb green card. I don't even need to read the text. We have a dog that is like a knight of the Knight of the White Orchard, which is not a Vintage playable card. Nope. This is not happening. Things that, I guess you can technically Dark Ritual this out. So what does it do? At the beginning of your end step, if you lost more than 2 life, you get a zombie, and you can exile this along with the eye and hand of Vecna to make a big thing. I believe the eye is like possibly playable in PO, but I don't know what the hand of Vecna is. I'm going to just go off on a limb and say this is not very strong. What is this? Hobgoblins? Anything in Hobgoblin life? Other goblins? Tap R to deal damage equal to the amount of goblins is probably just win more usually, so I can't imagine that matters too much. Return X cards with different mana values, where if if 8, yeah, I mean, it's just costs too much mana. Blink an artifact or creature at end step. That's not really a vintage playable thing. Nope. Bad Grizzlebrand. Nope. If you would create a treasure, instead create those. If you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. This is probably not good enough to see any play, but I am theory crafting it. I want to give Magda another try. I want to use Magda to put a Bola Citadel in play, so this might help me in my quest to make Magda activations happen, so it could be reasonable. This card's too slow. I mean, there are just better things that you can tinker for than this Wizard Spellbook. This thing makes treasure tokens for 2 and a life. I gotta keep that in the back of my head as well. Anything that makes treasures is interesting to me. But all these cards are just not super powerful. Is the big takeaway here. I'm still not seeing a single card that I think would be played in Vintage. This one I have seen, and I think this one could possibly see play. I don't think it will, but it has a powerful enough ability. So this is a legendary gnome that has tap white and sack an artifact to search for an artifact that costs the mana value +1. So it's a birthing pod for artifacts off of white and tap, only as a sorcery. That is certainly a powerful ability, and there are lots of very strong artifacts that you can cheat on mana and get into play, and then pod into maybe stronger ones. So I've played a Birthing Pod shops list on my stream before. Obviously, this can't get cast off of Workshop, which makes it less relevant, but it's a powerful enough effect that I think it's worth like digging into the stack of cards just to see if anything really works. Wish is an interesting one. This is just a very generic wish effect, but unlike Burning Wish, this one goes into your yard and you can cast it again, and it also gets any card from outside the game. So not only instants and not only sorceries, we can get instants, we can get land, so you could wish for a tabernacle. I think this card could be good. I don't know if you may play a card you own from outside the game this turn. So it's not exactly wish where it's going into your hand. You have to play it this turn. But like I said, you can play a tabernacle, which is very relevant. Being able to play 3 mana and put a tabernacle in play is pretty good. But yeah, I mean, you can flash this back, which is a non-trivial thing. You can get a creature. I don't know if 3 is a lot of mana, is what I would say. So there's a chance that it just gets priced out because of how much it costs. But the fact that this is like completely a full toolbox, you can get any card. It's probably pretty playable. I don't know if this lets you get cards from exile. I don't think this wording would let you get cards from exile, right? Exile is a zone now. Okay, so it won't let you get cards from exile. So this could be too much mana, but the fact that you can get lands is what makes it worthwhile, like worth talking about in my mind. So this card is just keep an eye on. Could be very playable. A bunch of dumb creatures. This isn't like an interesting thing, but the problem is it's like you have to wait a whole turn cycle for it to blow up, which is just not going to be very good. This card will definitely see play in a Matt Murray deck. Turning mana to cast dragon spells of different colors is pretty cool. I think this is not a super strong card, but it's definitely a card that you can look to. There are some very powerful colored mana dragons in Vintage. I'm thinking like Sprite Dragon, Murktide Regent. There's some interesting things you can do with this, but like I said, obviously not a super strong card by any means. And we're whiffing. There's a bunch of cards that say treasure, which is interesting to me. This is actually one that probably see me try to play. As an additional cost to this 1 in a black, you sack a creature or an artifact and draw 2 cards and get a treasure. So you're getting your artifact back, you're getting 2 cards, you're getting a mana back. If you're sacking like a treasure, it's pretty good value. We've played all kinds of spells like this that draw cards. I mean, I've even played a video with Perilous Research. So I think this is worth keeping an eye on as a possible artifact treasure draw spell enabler. It's also an instant, which I didn't realize, which is a nice upgrade too. Being able to hold open Flusterstorm at end of turn, maybe try to draw 2 cards. I think this has a chance. It's a pretty powerful draw spell, and I like it a lot. So we'll have to see. I will be at least trying this card in a variety of different treasure and artifact based shells. I think this card is pretty reasonable. Scroll. All right, there's all these classes. I don't really feel like they're geared for vintage very much. They're just slow, static enchantments. This one is like a bard class is pretty interesting because the level 2 of it makes legendary spells cost red and green less, which is interesting. That's a powerful ability, but I don't think there's anything like super crazy you can do with it. So I'm pretty off, I think, all of the classes. I don't see anything in here that would make me change my mind on that. This card is actually like very strong if you put it in play, but it also is another one of the cards where you have to wait until the beginning of your upkeep to use its ability, which is I think rules out most things in Vintage. If you have to wait a turn to get value with it, I don't really like it. It's one of the big reasons I don't like Oath right now, because you have to wait a turn to get value from your Oath. So I'm not a huge fan. You could put like you could put a Consecrated Sphinx in your deck, and I think it's probably better than this card. Volo is not a strong card by any means, but at least a card that I'm going to try to make a deck with. It seems like a sweet deck building challenge, so I'm really excited to just try to build a deck with this Volo. But I don't think it'll be any good. Is Baral a thing in Vintage? Baral did see some amount of play at different points in time. There used to be a player who really enjoyed playing Gifts Ungiven decks, and they frequently played Baral in their deck. Since that player stopped playing those decks, it just hasn't really seen any play, no. But I actively think Baral is not a terrible card, and totally a card that could see play in Vintage given the right circumstances. Protean Hulk's not really a thing because Flash, which is the best way to do Hulk combos, is restricted. Again, this thing makes treasure tokens, so I'm interested in trying something with it, but in general, these cards are just pretty low power level. And now we get to the good stuff. The good stuff, the artifacts. Deck of many things. So tap 2 and roll a d20, subtract it based on the number of cards in your hand, and then you get return random card from your graveyard, draw 2 cards, or put a creature from any graveyard into play. When that creature dies, its owner loses the game. This is very achievable with Workshop mana. The problem is I don't think it's worth sinking all of the mana. Like, you need to have 5 Workshop mana and 2 extra mana, and then you still have some element of chance. You probably could return some garbage. Like, you really only want to be able to draw 2 cards. I think this is probably too much work for it to actually be good, but it is a powerful legendary artifact, so something that you could technically try in a Workshop-based deck. Eye of Vecna, I think, is interesting. It might be a playable one-up in PO. PO is always looking for an extra artifact to gain value with. This ETBs, draws a card. Obviously, losing 2 life isn't super good in the current state of Vintage, where people are attacking your life total. But just having a 2-drop ETB draw card is like pretty normal. But it also gives you the ability to pay 2 every turn and draw another card and lose another 2 life. So a repeatable draw engine in PO is something that PO wants. So I could easily see Eye of Vecna being tried as a one-of in PO decks, and maybe it's playable. But losing 2 life and then losing more 2 life is a lot of life. So I could see that being problematic. And then treasure chest. So I was going to play some treasure chests tonight in the KCI video that probably went up a day before this will go up on YouTube. I don't think treasure chest is super good, but it's at least a really fun card. It's worth noting that creating 5 treasure tokens is the correct number of treasure tokens just to activate Magda, which is something that I'm actively trying to do with my life, is activate Magda and put Bola Citadel in play. Treasure chest, I thought it'd be fun to play it in KCI, where you can sack it, get things back, and do some fun D20 stuff. Getting a bunch of treasure tokens in KCI or drawing 3 cards are both, like, both of these outcomes, 2 through 19, are both pretty good in KCI. So I thought that I would try to play 2 treasure chests tonight. Obviously, we were not able to acquire them because it is hard to acquire cards without the events being started. But I think this is a fun card, and I'm going to try to play this card, but I don't think it is a crazy meta breaker or anything like that. And then I don't think there should be too much more. Oh, there's one more thing. I don't think any of these lands are super strong, except this is a land to keep their eye on. Treasure Vault is a artifact land. So in Vintage, that means it's a very vulnerable, crazy land that you're probably just going to get destroyed a lot.
Announcement received.
But it's worth noting that this has just like a tutorable way to get a ton of treasure tokens, which is a hard thing to do in a lot of decks. So I think that, you know, it's worth trying and being aware that this card exists when you're building like land tutor packages. Maybe you have a Golos, maybe you have an expedition map, you're playing Urza's Saga, maybe you have an expedition map, and maybe you want one of these in your deck just to have the option to maybe transform a land into treasure for whatever reason. I don't think that this card will see play, but it's definitely a card to keep in mind when you're building your land packages. And that's really it. This set is pretty weak overall. Wait, where's the one more card? There's one card. We missed the best card. Where's the portable hole? I almost made it all the way through. Aha, portable hole. And we saved the best for last. This is probably the strongest card in the set. This is a white mana artifact that prisons a non-land permanent that costs 2 or less. So I think that this is a very, very good card for Paradoxical Outcome. It's a main deckable collector oof hate piece that can be picked up with your Paradoxical Outcome. And I don't know how this changes how you build PO. Maybe you're playing heavy index into white. Maybe you're playing multiple of these in the main deck. I don't know what the final answer is, but I think that this is the card to look out for in terms of Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms.